Chapter 6. The second Dantestic circle or sphere of Mercury. We are now going to study carefully the second Dantestic circle. I want to emphatically refer to the negative aspect, or better said, the submerged aspect of the planet Mercury. We are not going to speak about the heaven of Mercury. I repeat, it is indispensable that we investigate what is related strictly to the antithesis of that brilliant heaven. When we penetrate into the interior of the earth with the astral body, we can verify for ourselves perfectly and in a direct manner what the hell of Mercury is. On penetrating this submerged region, we feel in the depth of our soul the perpetual boiling of the negative passionate forces that incessantly flow and reflow in that subterranean zone. It is superfluous to say that there we feel the hurricane wind of Mercury, a certain fatal aerial element. This subterranean zone is the place where fornicators live, those who enjoy the extraction of the sacred sperm from their organism. These unhappy creatures of the buried world, sunk in the vice, desperately come and go, here and there and everywhere. One is amazed to see these lost ones cohabit incessantly in the atomic hells of nature. Such egos blaspheme incessantly and hate mortally everything that has the flavor of chastity. There we find the Empress Semiramis, a terrible fornicator that established in her country laws that favored animal passions. In the abode of Pluto, we also find Queen Dido, who killed herself out of passion after having sworn fidelity to the ashes of Sychaeus. There we find Paris, who kidnapped beautiful Helen of ancient Troy and Achilles, the impetuous warrior, destroyer of citadels, Tartarus of miseries, abysses of iniquity, terrors, horrors. With profound pain we can find in the second Dantestic circle the fallen bodhisattvas, those who murdered the god Mercury, unhappy souls that exchanged their firstborn rights for a plate of lentils. What pain we felt in the depth of our consciousness to discover in those mercurial abysses the fallen angels cited by the ancient religious theogonies, those who exchanged the scepter of power for the distaff of unveil, come and go in the black airs of the submerged region, a region where human understanding does not function, a world of brutal instincts, where lasciviousness mires with the impetus of violence. There is the mysteries of Mints or of Mina, frightening profundities where the black tantric ones live, who develop the abominable Kundartiguador organ, the cause of so many evils. And if the glorious Archangel Sakaki, with his sacred committee, had foreseen with mathematical exactness the fatal result of that satanic tale, of that organ of abominations that at that time was allowed to develop in humanity with definite planetary purposes, how different the future of poor suffering humanity would have been. It is ostensible that each human being is a creature that captures the distinct cosmic forces to transform them and transmit them to the interior layers of the earth. However, on the Lemurian continent, some 18 million years ago, the earth trembled incessantly, its volcanoes vomiting forth fire and lava. Certain sacred individuals headed by the Archangel Isis allowed the development of the abominable Kundartiguador organ, a terribly negative luciferic force, projecting from the Ch.6 towards the atomic infernos of May. It is not superfluous to remember that such a negative foat was covered by the physical tail, such as we see in apes. Then the dwellers of the earth carried on their appearances such an appendage or projection of the dorsal spine. The forces that, in that era, passed through the human organisms suffered as a result categorical modifications that permitted the stabilization of the terrestrial cortex. Much later in the history of the centuries, other sacred individuals, considering that the abominable Kundartiguador organ, Satan a tail, was no longer necessary, Iawin see from the human body, such an appendage. Unfortunately, the awful results of the organ of witches remained in the 5 cylinders of the organic machine, centers known as intellect, emotion, movement, instinct, and sex. Going into depth on this topic, we can discover for ourselves that such tenebrous results are perfectly defined as psychic aggregates or quarrelsome and vociferous I's, personifying errors and making up the ego, the myself, and the self. Millions of human creatures with the abominable Kundartiguador organ totally developed inhabit the submerged sphere of Mercury. With this, I do not want to say that the physical tail of the apes is found actually developed in the anatomy of the 3-brained or 3-centered biped. Certainly at that site, there exists a very incipient osseous residue of the abominable tail in the human anatomy. However, the psychic aspect of such an organ is found in the metaphysical appearance of millions of rational humanoids. This we come to evince in a clear manner when dressed in our astral body. We penetrate into the submerged realms of the mercurial type, beneath the epidermis of the planet Earth. Question: Master, I would like to know if the persons and actions that play a part in your exposition of the second Danteistic circle are simply mythological or real, since although Dante mentions them, we understand that his work is simply a literary work of great merit. Answer: Noble sir, distinguished ladies, let me solemnly affirm that the Divine Comedy of Dante is an initiatic and esoteric text that very few human beings have understood. The mythological personages cited in that text, or the dwellers of the submerged sphere of Mercury, symbolically represent the living animal passions of such a region. The impetuous Achilles, with his terrible sexual licentiousness, the adulterous Helen, the ever libidinous Paris, clearly personify the inhabitants of the tenebrous zone of Mercury. In particular, I would like to say that one of these personages, that Helen kidnapped by Paris, and the cause of so many evils in ancient times, has other more beautiful positive symbolism, about which I will not talk of in these moments. Let us look only at the abysmal aspect, the antithesis of what shines, the tenebrous mercurial phase. Ladies and gentlemen, remember that each symbol can be translated in 7 different ways. Tonight we are only studying this very particular abyss of mercurial type, the one below the epidermis of the planet on which we live. Question: Master, can you tell me if this mercurial circle is of a denser degree, and if it is of a greater suffering than the first circle? Answer: Friend who asks the question, remember what we have already said in past talks when we studied the ray of creation. It is evident that to a greater number of laws corresponds greater mechanicity and pain. The submerged sphere of the moon is governed exclusively by 96 laws. However, the tenebrous aspect of Mercury within the planetary M on which we live is made up of 192 laws. Therefore, the mechanicity is even greater, and as a result, the sufferings are much more intense. Besides, the atoms of this tenebrous mercurial sphere are much heavier. Each of these contain in their interior 192 atoms of the absolute. This means that the tenebrous mercurial region is even denser than the lunar one. Question: Master, do the souls that enter this submerged zone of Mercury have any possibility of returning? Answer: Distinguished lady, honorable gentlemen, do not forget that side by side with justice there is always mercy. In these tenebrous abysmal regions there dwell some masters of the Great White Lodge, great initiates, divine beings that renounced all happiness to help the lost ones. When some soul repents in the abode of Pluto, undoubtedly it is always assisted by these saints. Unquestionably, such beings instruct, admonish, and point out the path of light to all those who have really repented of their perversities. When this happens, those who are condemned to perdition return, re-enter, they reincorporate themselves into a new organism. Question: Master, do you emphasize that the first submerged lunar region is of the dead? And on the other hand, you do not affirm this in relation to the second submerged zone of Mercury. Answer. Very well, sir. Listen. Carefully revise the Divine Comedy of Dante. Investigate for yourself. Learn to move consciously and positively in the astral body. Experiment and see. Obviously, the Orcus of the classics, the limbo of the Christians, is only the antechamber of hell, although it corresponds to the first Dantestic circle. Every initiate knows that we, millions of human beings, live in such a region after death. The encounter with Minos, the demon that marked with the turns of his tail the circle where the dead go, can only be carried out in the submerged sphere of Mercury. This, then, is not a whim of mine. I repeat, to whomever, investigate for yourself in a direct manner and corroborate my affirmations. Question. Master, I do not understand what you have just said. Why is it that in the buried world of Mercury live the fornicating eyes, which also constitute the myself or Ru, and the same occurs in the first Dantestic circle? Answer. Very well, sir. Undoubtedly, almost all the three-brained or three-centered bipeds, mistakenly called men, are deep down more or less fornicators. However, the great law, as I have said in past tier signs to each soul, 108 existences in each cycle of cosmic manifestation, it is evident, plain and manifest, that no one can be thrown into the abysses of perdition without completing his cycle of existences. Normally, the dead live in limbo, the latter represented by all the caverns of the world. Only those fornicators who have already exhausted their cycle of humanoid existences definitely enter the submerged negative region of Mercury. However, I beg youth, please comprehend me. There sometimes exist on Earth true monstrous humanoids that no longer offer any possibility of redemption. They are cases that are definitely lost, and although they have not exhausted the complete cycle of 108 existences, unquestionably they enter the infernal worlds. Question. Master, we know that the sphere of Mercury is of the fornicators. Does this mean that the I divide themselves in the different Dantestic circles, according to the different psychic aggregates? Answer. Young man who asks that question, it is clear that the ego is a sum of diverse psychic aggregates that personify errors. Some of these correspond specifically to a Dantestic circle, and others are found intimately linked with other more submerged circles. However, the totality, the sum of negative values, are together precipitated, involuting within the mineral kingdom towards the center of planetary gravity. The conscience of the condemned should experience in each descending circle, in each infradimension of nature, beneath the three-dimensional region of Euclid, its corresponding psychological defects. Tonight we are talking exclusively about the second circle. Later, after revising the 9 Dantestic circles, we will study in detail the law of perpetual movement. Then all of you, ladies and gentlemen, will be able to go a bit more in depth into the topic that corresponds to the question that was asked by the young man here. Question. Master, does that mean to say that in this circle that corresponds to lust, fornication has become terribly mechanical, and as a result painful and revolting? Answer. Very well, my friend, listen. In that black and fatal air, lust tends to mix with violence, and then everything becomes instinctive and brutal. Understood? Question. What shocks us, tremendously venerable Master, is that in spite of the tortures that are suffered in this circle, those who dwell there believe that they're doing very well. Would you like to explain this? Answer. Noble sir, the people of the abyss think the best of themselves. They firmly believe that they are on the path of righteousness and of love, and consider that we, who are on the path of the revolution of consciousness, walk, as they say, towards our own destruction. I want you to know that the tenebrous ones, moved by good intentions, tempt us incessantly with the purpose of, as they say, saving us. In these abysmal regions, we see many hermits, penitent ones, fakirs, mystics, monks, etc., admonishing diverse human groups totally convinced that they are doing very well. Question: Master, these souls that are so convinced that they are doing very well, do they know they are in hell? Answer: Noble madam, who asked that question? The word hell, infernos, is derived from the Latin infernus, that signifies inferior region. Within the interior of the earth, we find the world of natural elementals, and it is unquestionable that the lost never consider such elements or submerged regions as a place of perdition. Normal run-of-the-mill people have their consciousness asleep. However, those who enter the abysmal regions awaken in evil for evil. Such people have a very special psychological idiosyncrasy, a fatal logic of a different type. Do not be surprised, do not be shocked if, for the abysmal lost ones, white is black and vice versa. To name Jesus the Great Kabir or the Divine Mother Kundalini in those submerged regions is for such condemned people a blasphemy, something unforgivable, and consequently that would be equivalent to provoking their anger. Then we would see them furiously attacking us. The lost do not ignore the concrete fact that they have to pass through the second death. However, they do not fear it, they implore it, they ask for it, they know that that is the door of escape to return to the surface of the earth and reinitiate a new evolving ascent that will go from stone to man. Understood. Question: Master, a person like me that observes absolute sexual abstention, would I perhaps be free from entering the second Dantistic circle? Answer: Friends, brothers, it is indispensable, it is urgent and undelayable to know that lust processes itself in the 49 regions of the subconscious. Many saints who arrived at supreme chastity in the merely intellective level failed when they were subjected to tests in the more profound regions of the subconscious. Someone could, for example, have achieved chastity in the 48 subconscious regions and fail in the 49th. Many men and virtuous women that called themselves chaste and innocent are now inhabitants of the second Dantistic circle. Thousands of religious persons, priests of all beliefs, that thought they had attained the most absolute chastity now live in the hell of Mercury. Let no one then call themselves chaste. Whoever feels sure, let him look behind and not fall. Question: Master, you have mentioned the 49 regions of the subconscious, and I can say frankly that it is the first time that I hear such a number, since in all the treatises of psychology, parapsychology, and psychoanalysis, where the processes of the consciousness, subconscious and infraconscious, etc., are mentioned and studied, these 49 divisions or regions that you mention are not mentioned. Why is this so? Answer: Distinguished gentlemen, ladies that listen to me, it is convenient to remember the septenary constitution of the authentic M. Since the three-brained or three-centered biped, mistakenly called man, has not yet awakened consciousness, has not created the existential bodies of the being, he only possesses, in reality, subconscious and subjective states. Multiply the septuple aspect by itself, and you will have the 49 subconscious regions of every humanoid. Obviously, on awakening consciousness, these 49 states become conscious, and only then would we have conscious and integral objectivity. We need to transform the subconscious into conscious, and this is only possible by disintegrating the psychic aggregates that make up the ego, the myself, the very self. Let us remember that consciousness is bottled up in such aggregates. Disintegrating the latter, the consciousness becomes awakened. The lust, the fornication of the submerged circle of Mercury beneath the terrestrial cortex, is certainly the foundation and the basis of the existential ego. Question: Some of your books, Master, explain that to be able to awaken consciousness, one has to dissect with the intellect the I or psychological defect that one wants to eliminate, and that this is done in the 49 departments of the subconscious. But if we do not have an awakened consciousness as yet, how can we penetrate with the intellect into those 49 regions? Would you like to explain this to us? Answer, friends. It would not be possible to be able to radically disintegrate the ego in an instantaneous manner and simultaneously in all the 49 subconscious regions. I invite you to reflect and to investigate this matter in a clear and perfect manner. When we want to annihilate any psychological defect, lust, for example, or any other, we should first of all comprehend it. However, the unitotal comprehension of the defect in question could not be an immediate act in the 49 subconscious regions. This means a progressive advance on the path of understanding. In a gradual manner, we will comprehend and eliminate the I of the defect in question in each of the subconscious regions. This would mark a methodical, profound, and orderly development of consciousness. As consciousness awakens, comprehension becomes clearer each time until it reaches its final stage. Then the defect would be radically annihilated.